Welcome to another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. Actually, not just another episode, our 100th episode. And today's special, great episode, we're going to talk about the state of cybersecurity in FinTech. I have an amazing panel today, and I'm going to introduce them right now. We're going to bring them each to the stage, and we are going to go over their bios. So we're going to go in order of the pictures that you've seen. Boom, dance on. Names on Joyce. Welcome to the Tech Behind FinTech. My amazing panel is on. I'm going to introduce everyone and go through your bios, and then we're going to get into the show. Today's a really, really exciting show. This is actually our first panel in the 99 episodes we've done so far. And let me introduce my amazing panel, and we'll jump right into it. First guest, Dan Faltyn, Tech Project Manager, Cloud CISO at Google. Dan is also the former CISO at Blue Matrix. He brings a deep understanding of financial services from his work at JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs, where he co-developed 2 patented security and design patterns. Dan has a Master's of Science in Computer Science from Columbia University. Welcome, Dan. Well, welcome back, Dan. My next panelist.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for being a friend of the show. My next panelist, Renee Small, cybersecurity super recruiter, CEO of Cyber Human Capital. Cybersecurity super recruiter Renee Small helps people take the mystery out of breaking into cybersecurity. She's passionate about building best-in-class cybersecurity teams. In 2017, Renee received the Stevie Award for Female Entrepreneur of the Year. She's a #1 Amazon bestselling author of Magnetic Hiring, a contributing editor to several cybersecurity magazines, and she co-hosts a podcast called Breaking into Cybersecurity. Welcome, Renee.
Thank you for bringing me on for the 100th episode. Woohoo!
Yeah, I thought you were about to say for the 100th time because you.
I saw my name, my face pop. I was like, yay, yes.
Oh, by the way, that's our new theme song. You'll be hearing a lot of that moving forward. My next panelist, Joyce Mehlman, founder of iLEX Consulting Group. Joyce is a banking professional of over 35 years of experience, concentrated in operations, compliance, and project management. She has worked for banks all sizes, both domestic and international, and across all areas and products. She has been working with startups since joining Bancorp Bank in 2006 as their COO. Her team supported operations, compliance, customer service, risk, new account opening, wire ACH processing, and FinTech oversight for audit purposes. Joyce, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here and to do your 100th episode. I'm excited.
I'm really excited. Thanks for coming back. The next panelist, Nnamdi Torkura. Nnamdi Torkura is a cybersecurity researcher and cloud security engineer. He's the co-founder and CTO of Mitigant. He spent over 10 years in cybersecurity and is passionate about exploring the intersection and security, chaos engineering, incident response, risk analysis, and threat detection in for cloud security. He has published more than 20 academic papers about several cloud security domains and was contributing author in the first O'Reilly book on security chaos engineering. And let me also say, Dr. Torkura has recently completed his PhD in cybersecurity from the Hasso-Plattner Institute. So congratulations on that, by the way, and welcome back to the show, Nnamdi.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's nice to be here for this very special edition of the show. Just a little bit correction. I am yet to hand in my thesis, so almost there. But yeah, thanks for
I'm sorry, I thought that happened already. Thank you for clarifying that.
It's all good. Thanks a lot.
Right. The next panelist, Matt Almeida, is the VP of Engineering at Neocova. Matt is the VP of Engineering at Neocova, has spent the majority of his career navigating the intersection between modern data and distributed cloud architecture. Presently, his focus is on delivering a state-of-the-art data platform to small and mid-sized community banks to build new insights into their business and drive opportunities they can otherwise miss. Welcome back to the show, Matt.
Thanks so much, Nnamdi. I'm excited to be here.
Hey guys, so that concludes the bio. So let's just go over some a few things for the audience. At any point in time, please feel free to drop in questions. Actually, it is to your benefit. Today is the first day we are giving out prizes for some really engaging questions. So be sure to join in. We'll be monitoring it and we will post them up. The prizes, let me clarify, are only for LinkedIn users. So I know we're streaming live from LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and also we have something going on Instagram. If you are on those platforms and you want to be eligible for a prize, log into LinkedIn, post your questions, we post it to the screen. So that goes over that. So those of you who've watched our show before kind of know how we roll. We first talk about some current news topics, and then we jump into the main topic, and that helps us keep our hand on the pulse. We like to get some insight from some of our panelists on these topics, and then we will proceed from there. So first news topic of the day. So operator hackers, or operate oneer hackers, however you pronounce it, they stole over 11 million from banks in telcos. They did this across banks in Africa. So how they initially work? They obtain initial access through spear phishing emails, leveraging popular topics like invoicing or postal delivery notifications. The emails have attachments that deliver the first stage of malware. Among them, NetWire, BitRat, VenoRat, Agent Tesla, Remcos, Neutrino, BlackNet. These are some of the different malware that they put in. The group also says that the hackers distributed password snippers and dumpers. So throughout these attacks, they've been doing it for a few years now. And also, they're an advanced persistent threat. They can spend between 3 and 12 months inside a compromised network. And sometimes they attack the same company twice. The researchers say that after getting access to a victim network, the hackers may also use the infrastructure as a pivot to other targets. Let me just call out to the audience. Whoever wants to jump in first is getting some thoughts. I'll let Dan, any thoughts on that?
Not really, a bit outside of my realm.
Okay, no worries. Anyone else wants to jump in and take a stab at that?
Tough question.
Okay, no worries. That's fine. All right, so on that side, it's interesting. Currently, looking at the from my side, looking at the MITRE attack kill chain, and some of the stuff described in this article is exactly, from looking at initial access to then, okay, how do you become persistent? How do you evade attack? It fits right into the playbook. So those are the things that I've noticed. It's another slide I like to demonstrate. I like to show real quick. We're going to go back to this. So if we look at the kill chain, they got initial access with spear phishing. From there, they in this case they used malware to execute, and then they went on to persist and privilege escalation and so forth. So that's what I got from that article. Found it interesting. Anyone from the audience would like to add in, definitely let me know. Okay, let's move on to the next article and kind of talk about the state of the world here. So Stripe cuts 14% of their workforce. They say the CEO overhired in the world that we're in. So, what we saw in 2020, everyone was locked down working from home. In general, companies like Stripe and a lot of technology companies and so forth expanded in their market share. They hired rapidly. Now what we're seeing, the economy's changed. Talks of a recession. Obviously, interest rates are up. Now companies are shrinking in size. Let's talk more about this in terms of some information from the article. Then we'll jump into some thoughts. Yeah, so I personally like how the CEO handled it. He just came. He admitted it. He said, "Look, we overhired for the world that we're in, and it pains us to be unable to deliver the experience that we hope that those impacted would have at Stripe. While there is never a perfect way to handle such a large-scale round of layoffs, Collison's announcement is notable in terms of the degree to which he accepts blame for the situation, pointing to two specific mistakes the company and leadership made. And I also looked at his letter. They made it public, and it was, in terms of what they're going to do for the people that got laid off and so forth. They're going to be starting a alumni email for all those to look at different benefits. They also mentioned that if they want to start a business, they'll give deep discounts on using the Stripe platform. So I want to get some thoughts from the panel on what you guys think about this, especially from like an HR perspective. Renee?
Sure. I was just reading about this situation, and I'm looking at the many companies right now, many of us think we're already in a recession. They say a recession is coming or what have you. So a lot of this is to be expected. The interesting part, or I guess it's not interesting because this is what happens. HR, a lot of the folks who have gotten laid off have been in HR. I was literally just looking at Stripes. There's like a Google spreadsheet that's been going around of people who want to put their information out there. And some of Stripes employees put their info. It's about 300 or so people. And the vast majority of those people are in HR. Of course, when you're laying off, recruiters are the first to go, and the coordinators and things like that. So I was just doing some research around Stripe and other companies. And I don't know if you want to get into it now or get into it later. That, 32, when you talk about technology, FinTech, all that stuff, is that companies are laying off, but I don't see a ton of layoffs yet in security. So I'm seeing the layoffs happening. I'm seeing folks across the board. But when it comes to security, I'm not seeing, groups of like large scale layoffs. So that's my take on Stripe right now. And I guess the industry as a whole from a cybersecurity perspective.
No, thanks for that. I mean, that's really interesting. I mean, I noticed the same thing too. I mean, the first thing that comes is the hiring freezes. And obviously, if you're not hiring, and then from an HR recruitment standpoint, that's obviously what the function is. So what you're saying makes total sense just from an industry perspective overall. And yeah, we're definitely going to jump into the security question and also technology in general and the impact this is having on FinTech, because obviously that's what we've been hearing all around. You see different companies from like Chime, MX, it's just you're hearing about the layoffs. So you're wondering from a technology perspective, obviously the Tech Behind FinTech, who's being impacted. So thank you for shedding that light on it. Before we move on to the main topic of the day, does anyone else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, what I was going to say is we're seeing some of that as well. It's definitely not in the security space. We're seeing product managers, project managers, some engineers. Those are the people that are getting HR, obviously, you're right, recruiters are the ones that are getting immediately hit by these layoffs. And I think for FinTechs, the biggest reason why you're not seeing the security space is they don't hire a lot of people in that space to begin with. So they have a very lean crew when it comes to security. It's not part of their core engineering team. Those aren't the guys building the apps and the APIs and all of that. And so they don't have a lot of people to lay off. And because the industry itself is getting more oversight on security, they can't afford to lay off the people they do have, right? So the people that unfortunately are more in that view of being laid off are going to be people that are that can be done without, that the product people, the project people, the HR people. It's people that aren't going to get them into trouble with regulators.
I mean, and Joyce, that's a really interesting point that you brought up. In looking at my own experience and looking at different FinTechs, that's spot on. The security team is usually slim. So, you tend not to see that in terms of massive layoff stakes. It's not a massive amount of people. So that's an excellent point. Thanks for bringing that up.
I see on the one hand, it's positive that they aren't cutting security, that they're keeping that standard high. But on the other side, the fact that you can cut 14% of your workforce and you claim to have security staff for that, a little bit scary. The slim hiring for security professionals and individuals in the industry is something that I don't think we found the right size fit of how many is the right size crew to help this many systems or this much of a team. And it's interesting because the only way to find it is to blunder through and hopefully not make mistakes like a breach or a layoff. But it's interesting to see the industry evolve and kind of grow and realize it needs a lot more focus in that field.
Yeah, I would agree. And you're right. It is, you learn by living it. I mean, having come from the banking side of this, and it's cyclical. Like, we didn't have huge compliance teams back when, right? It was mostly engineers and operations. And then the regulators came in and started citing all these banks for not having the proper oversight from the compliance side. And now you're seeing compliance teams of 50, 100 people, right, that are tasked there. And you're seeing the product and the engineering teams take the brunt of the hits for that because they can't afford to keep both teams on. Same's going to happen with security. They're going to have to hire more, and who's going to get the impact? It's going to be people that are on the outskirt of the company that they can afford to lay off and not impact their customer.
I want to touch on the question that Matt the point he just made. Maybe this is a question for you, Renee. What is that size? Like, what is that ratio of I need this many security people to this number of employees? Or is there a ratio like that from what you've seen in your experience?
Why are you asking me questions I can't answer? There probably is. I don't know.
Oh, good. And, because some of these, like, I love this show because it's also a learning point for me too. And in that question he just brought up, now I'm going to go behind the scenes and I want to start researching that because, is there a formula? And have we seen that in the industry? Is someone thinking through that? Like, I'm like really curious about that now.
No, seriously, that is a good question. And there probably is. I don't know if someone else on the panel knows. Joyce?
I mean, I don't know if we know the number. We know that based on the number of systems you have, you need to know, like, third-party oversight is becoming extremely important for fintechs to have to prove to their issuing banks. And some of that is, who are the vendors you're working with? So is it AWS? Is it Google? Is it VGS? Is it all these different tools that are in the security space? And how are you making sure that they are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing? So that whole piece of security is actually bigger than just a tech guy who is looking over, right, the systems and making sure that they're working properly. It's compliance around that as well. So I don't know if there's a good number. It really depends on, for me, when I work with my companies, it's how big are you, how many systems are you using, how many customers do you plan on having, and what have you built versus what are you buying?
And I'm assuming also if they already have, like, if it's a large enough company and they have like a technology risk and they have all those different groups that would be doing some oversight or maybe aligned to security, it would be potentially less security professionals needed because you have some of that duplication of effort. Well, not duplication, but you have people that could be doing it in a different department and not technically called security,
Correct.
but they're also looking at security risk. So it is it's an interesting topic. You could make me research today, Nnamdi.
You know what?
You know
what that sounds like? That sounds like another show. Like, that sounds
It
like
does.
an actual show.
Yeah.
We're gonna really like talk through it. So thanks, Matt, for that.
I think.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so I think maybe it's what I've also observed. There are some companies that maybe they have the belief that they don't need in-house security folks. Therefore, they use a lot of consultants or managed security services. For them, it feels like that maybe it's for cost reasons. They just depend on these external people, and for them, it's already okay for whatever they're doing. And so maybe this is another angle to add to your question, and maybe the next time you're going to be discussing about this, maybe some consultants who are actively providing services to companies can provide insights.
That's an excellent point. I mean, I know just from a historical point, like in different times, from my experience and just looking at the industry, at times when there are massive layoffs, the work still needs to get done. So they sometimes outsource that and bring on consultants to handle that. We have a question from the audience. Let me bring it to the screen. Our point, Nicholas Parks, security has negative unemployment Number two is the second point. Current hiring joke in security. You need 10 years of experience for an entry-level security job. Meanwhile, you get compromised by a highly motivated 20-year-old.
He's so right.
It's very true.
It's so true. It's so ridiculous. I posted up. I made a LinkedIn post just this week asking the folks in security if they've seen. There was an article about the trillions of dollars being poured into security, and the millions of people that we can't hire in security, and determining if there is a way, or the article proposed that companies look at non-traditional candidates. And so I posed out there, hey, does anyone know of companies looking at non-traditional candidates? And it was kind of a bit of a rhetorical question because, there's a small percentage that I've seen in the industry doing this, but overall, they're not. And to Nicholas's point, they ask for all these experiences, certifications, this, that, the third, and some kid somewhere, for lack of better words, will just hack into your whole world. And, you put all these barriers up for people to try to break into the industry, folks that have the security degree, have a master's and all of that. And then, you're getting compromised by folks, you don't know what they have. So, I mean, he makes a really valid point. I could talk about this for the whole hour, so I'm going to be quiet.
And no, it's interesting that you say that because it was other points that I was reading and on different comments on LinkedIn and so forth, where, from a vendor side, a lot of money is being spent, but the person attacking you is using like Kali Linux and Metasploit, all free tools. So, there's some type of disconnect there in which the attackers are using relatively free resources, but we're spending, in terms of vendor scroll, just a ton of money on those different applications to protect. So it's an interesting back and forth with that. So, in jumping into the topic of the day, right, which we kind of started there, which I like, the state of cybersecurity and fintech. I'm going to kick it off with Dan. So here's a stat, right? The global fintech cloud industry was estimated at $44.4 billion in 2021 and is anticipated to hit $196.2 billion by 2031, registering a compound annual growth rate of 16.4% from 2022 to 2031. So, new fintechs tend to be cloud first. What are some of the security challenges that you've observed?
Yeah, thanks, Nnamdi. I guess before I answer the question, I think it's probably instructive to sort of answer like why the cloud? Like why are these startups going to the cloud, right? Why are they spending all the money there? And one of the things I think most important is the ability to deliver at scale and be able to do it very quickly, right? Especially when you talk about startups, right? That's make it or break it, get your product out there fast, right? Make a difference. With that is also the scale, like just the sheer compute that you can get from any sort of public cloud provider. With that, it's sort of not just the scale, but you get this like different customer experience, right? You kind of like there's sort of that panacea of write once, deploy on multiple platforms, right? You can do that with a lot of the facilities that the public cloud gives you. As it pertains to sort of fintech, though, and like the security challenges, I think generally, if we frame that's what their, the benefits of the cloud are really for anybody, but like for the fintech firms. I guess I thought about this because you kind of give me a heads up on this. I thought about this a little bit, and I kind of just distill it down to just like two things for discussion, I think. And these are sort of my personal observations of what I've seen. First is migration. So when we talk about moving from platform A to platform B, so if you're like a small firm and maybe you didn't start out in the cloud, I think that's less and less likely these days, but you got to migrate your data from A to B. And what are the risks in doing that? Losing data, making sure the data is categorized appropriately. If you're going to move personal information, banking information, very sensitive data. So migration is sort of a big security challenge at the front end. And then I think the next big one, and I don't know if there's a lot of debate on this one, but like human error, right? Misconfiguration. It's like pretty much like generally the cloud's number one biggest security thing, right? It's human error. So I think those are kind of the two big ones that I would kind of focus for FinTech is the data and the security around that data, and then human error. And, obviously being in a lot of cases regulated, those things are really going to be focused on, right? The protection of personal information and privacy of the data. So that's kind of the way I look at that. Some of the biggest security concerns.
No, that's great. I mean, and we're going to go into data breaches as well, since you brought that up. Before we head there, I'm going to open that question up also for more discussion to other members of the panel. Okay. No. So and then the next question I want to ask is, what do you see coming down the pike in terms of the cloud then?
And so I think things sort of turn into like a circle at this point. So, we have this new platform that everybody started using, being the cloud, right? And then now regulated industries are starting to use the cloud. And so now the regulators are scrambling to keep up and say, well, wait a minute, we can't force you to apply the same security controls or have the same policies that you had when you ran your own data center, right? Like physical controls and things like that. You've offloaded those to some other provider. And so now the regulation has to change. And okay, the regulation changes now. Things like startups, right? They sort of want to take advantage of these market disruptions and say, hey, the big banks can't keep up with this, but we can. We're small, we're nimble, right? Still got to play by the rules with the regulations. And so now it's going to drive even more innovation in this space, and it's going to drive more regulation. And so we kind of go into this loop. But I think sort of optimistically, if we look back historically, I'll give as an example in the UK, the Financial Conduct Authority, I think it was all the way back in like 2016. They basically stated that it's okay for banks, right, which is the ultimate of regulated fintech, I guess. There's nothing wrong with them using cloud and changing their business model, right? So the regulators are kind of on board with sort of supporting this change, which is a good sign, I think, in the future. That innovation will continue.
I mean, that's an excellent point. I mean, and you see, right, it's one of those things where I'm looking at it, technology doesn't stop, the innovation doesn't stop. So you can either try to put a cap over it, which is extremely impossible, or you can get on board. And we see the same thing happening in blockchain, right? So now we're seeing regulators saying, okay, how do we regulate this? We went from a point where we didn't understand it. Now we have to understand it and have to start putting rules around it because it's going to continue to innovate. And same thing with the cloud. I mean, Dan and I, obviously, we go back a very, very long time, and we have worked together at certain big name firms. And at that long time ago, the concept of putting something outside of your own data center that the firm is not controlling you would have been fired for just the thought of it. So to see where we're at now, in which, to your point, right, if you're hosting this, but you're working with a cloud provider, I don't know, from a fintech perspective, and they're nimble, from a legacy bank perspective, they're innovating faster, they're scaling up at will, and it's hard to keep up. So something has to be done there. Before we move on to the next question, anyone else wants to add in?
Yeah, I was just going to say that although fintechs will take advantage of this, obviously they do. We don't work with any clients that aren't in the cloud today. Some of the bigger companies that are their partners are moving into the cloud if they aren't already in it. But understand that the oversight that the banks are putting on these fintechs, because they are moving in the cloud, is actually getting more, not less. So
Okay.
it's interesting to see that it's not your own data center. So yeah, we don't have physical security anymore. We take out things in our info security policies like locking doors and locking laptops and things we used to do. And when I was at all the big banks, to now it's more about, do you know who your third party vendor is that is supporting this security for you? do you have their info security policy, their attestations, their BCP plans, right? It's really hard to go to an AWS and ask them for their info security program, policy, but that's what the fintechs are being tasked with by their banks. So it's not letting up. It's not making it easier on them. They now just have a different compliance that they have to meet.
Now, that's interesting to dive into. I mean, one of the things when you start looking at public clouds, the whole concept of a shared security model. So yes, if I'm on it, I'm not responsible for the physical aspect, right? So AWS has armed, or AWS or Azure or Google, they have armed guards somewhere preventing you from just running up and taking a server. So, but you're still obviously responsible for the stuff that you have inside the cloud. So to your point that when the fintechs are partnering with the legacy banks, getting those third-party attestations, that's not letting up. I know, just in general, when you start looking at that, and I want to ask you this question. Sometimes you go on the websites on major cloud providers, they have links to all those things. Is that doable, or are the banking the banks that you work with who partner with small fintechs, are they asking for additional items besides the stuff that the public cloud providers put out?
Yeah, we've been able to use what's out there. There are some of them, like AWS. When you sign with them, they'll give you a backdoor into some of their stuff that's not out on the actual internet. And so or Google, I think it is, one of them does. And so we're able to pull information down from there as well. The banks have been pretty good about letting us use what's out on the internet. They don't go pull it themselves. They still make us do it, review it, risk rate it. But then it leans towards more testing, right? Okay, all this is out there in public. You can get it. You can pull it down. You can say, I've done my due diligence, but have you tested this out? Have you tried to do a breach? Have you tried to hit against their firewalls? So it morphs. It just changes depending on, as the industry changes, so do the regulations, like we were just saying, and the banks have to, morph as well. And so now they're trying to figure out how they make sure that they can look at a regulator in the face and say, yes, my fintechs know that they are secure and that the data is secure, and that when we are, minimizing any risk for a breach. And if we do have one, what are we going to do about it? That's the big thing also, is what are our contingency plans?
No, these are all great points. And I think, Kennedy, you had something to add. I told you were about to add something.
Yeah, so I can speak more confidently about what I observe happening in Germany. So there are a couple of fintechs, or let's say modern generation banks, and then they're doing quite well. A couple of them have had issues. I remember there's one that actually expanded to the US and kind of closed shop after a while because they were moving so fast. Because at the other hand of this speed, there are regulations. So you move too fast, then you are not able to have a firm grip over what the regulators expect from you. But it's kind of very dicey, because in Germany, one of the bodies that regulates the banking industry actually advised banks to use cloud services for some of the reasons that Dan already mentioned, and again, because of things like resilience. However, we also have had the opportunity to speak with some of these new age banks, with like the CISOs or CISOs and other ones. I think the regulations are very much on them, and it's not so easy to kind of to prove that they are really keeping pace with these regulations, and it's a fight, so to say. So I think on the other hand, there are banks. I think it would take a long time for them to actually move to the cloud, because they have a lot of legacy systems, and moving them to the cloud is too complicated. So, but the younger ones have much more advantage. Some of them start from day one in the cloud, and they just take off, and it's much easier for them to be conform to the regulations.
Those are good points. And you know what? Since we're on this cloud topic, let me turn the next question over to you, Kennedy. You've done a lot of research, and also with your work with Mitigant in securing the cloud. What are some novel approaches? And I want you to explain the concept of chaos engineering.
Yeah. So thank you very much. So basically, we started thinking about chaos engineering more like it started from my doctoral thesis, because we try to understand the state of the art cloud security system. So using CSPM as an example, it checks for configurations, misconfigurations, and customers maybe users mistakes and so forth. But we had a question in our minds: how are we sure it's actually checking and giving us the correct answers? So we couldn't answer this question even using things like penetration testing or other classical cloud security systems that help to check things like vulnerability scanners and so forth. So we started looking around, and we saw that there was something called chaos engineering, which is all about you crafting failures and injecting them intentionally into a system so that you might exactly see how that system would behave in turbulent situations, when there are outages, when there are things that you normally do not happen every day. Then you have the chance to actually implement measures that will prevent these kinds of behaviors in real life. So we kind of said, well, if we can do this for availability, which is majorly what Netflix solved using chaos engineering, we thought we could also use it for integrity or confidentiality. So we started injecting failures that will impact on these security attributes. And then we can say, well, we can answer the questions like whether a CSPM is giving us correct answers or not, whether it flags all the errors. We realize that some CSPMs are limited because they might not have visibility into every space. And if you don't know this, you as a user, you will have a false sense of security. So you will just say, well, I have CSPM deployed, takes care of everything, but then it doesn't take care of some things. These are blind spots. So I think actually there are a couple of banks that are already using these. I think Sterling Bank, if I remember correctly, they're really into resilience. They're working together with a couple of, I think, like Attack IQ. There's a company called Attack IQ. They do more of attack simulation. It's not really chaos engineering, but they are really into this, and they are really using it to test the resilience of their infrastructure, so they're not taken by surprise by any kind of attack vector.
So a few things with that, just for the audience's information. CSPM, Cloud Security Posture Management. So they're basically tools that you can shoot against your cloud and look at compliance issues and different compliance families, from NIST to CIS and so forth. So from what you're saying, the chaos engineering in the cloud takes it a step further than your CSPM tool.
Exactly. So, for example, a CSPM might not test something like ransomware attack. Ransomware attack it goes through the entire attack chain, right? It can like, the direction is not really predictable. You might be able to use certain patterns. So basically, what chaos engineering does is it can test for if there are those patterns in your network, and then it can give you ideas as to where to harden, where to improve. This is beyond what a CSPM can do, obviously.
No, that's interesting. As we can see with this slide, from 2020 to 2021, ransomware is on the rise in the financial sectors, as long and also in other sectors. When it's bring that point on. No, that's excellent points. Before question for the panelists, anyone have anything to add to that, or questions around chaos engineering we want to dive into? Okay, just want to open up. And obviously, if you are listening to the show, feel free to hop in with questions around that. I've actually been fascinated with chaos engineering since Netflix and Chaos Monkey came out. Having it now in this, just of my own knowledge, I want to kind of dive into it. I'm an end user, well, technologist end user, right? And I'm managing a cloud network. How do I start to use the chaos engineering? How do I leverage that in a public cloud that I may be managing?
So the good thing is the cloud service providers also recognize the importance of chaos engineering. And for example, Amazon Web Services that the fault injection simulator service, which is an implementation of chaos engineering as a service. So, and this is something anybody, well, not anybody, there's a small learning curve there, but I mean, people can already use it and kind of already construct test or chaos test, and they can use it for their applications. This is much simple, and and it has a lot of safety measures, so you don't make mistakes or you don't do things that would cause problems. So, and I think also the other cloud service providers, at least I know about Azure. Azure also has a chaos studio, so they have their own implementation, which is easy to use. And there are a couple of open source, let's say, products that are already there on GitHub, so you could use any of them as you to start your journey.
No, thank you very much for that. Also, just an audience, you mentioned Attack IQ. I know that they have some really great learning resources of going along the cyber kill chain using the MITRE ATT&CK framework. So that's something that you want to Google if you want to learn more about that. Moving on to we're gonna go tech, non-tech, and switch it back. I want to open this question. I think we started on this pathway, but I want to kind of just follow up with Renee. The global cybersecurity workforce has reached an all-time high with an estimated of 4.7 million professionals. There's still an overall shortage of 3.4 million workers. In the US alone, there are 700,000 unfulfilled cybersecurity jobs. This spans across all verticals, but what are you seeing in terms of FinTech?
So to add on to what we talked about earlier, in terms of FinTech, I'm also not seeing, there's a shortage to what Nicholas said, the earlier commenter. There's a shortage of security professionals. There is a lean environment, like Joyce, commented on. So not really seeing the layoffs in security. I work with a couple of large financial services companies, and it's just hiring a lot of it. So I haven't seen any mass layoffs, like, occasionally one or two people, but I have not seen yet any mass layoffs in terms of security in the FinTech space or any other space, to be honest.
No, thanks for that. Before we move on to the next question, does anyone want to add to that?
Yeah, what I was going to say is I agree. I don't see the layoffs. I think the other problem, though, Renee, is what you don't see is the urgency to hire. So I think the number may not even be where it should be, because fintechs who are still working off investment money or going for the next rounds, it should be one of the things they're thinking about, but I promise you it's not. Right. And so we know that they're hiring engineers that are doing app builds and API integrations and marketing, and it's everything to get their numbers up. They're not thinking about the backend security. So where I think that number, that you stated out there that's open, I don't even know if that's accurate, because I don't think the fintechs have even put that in as a quote unquote position. It's just kind of lumped into engineering, and until they realize that a typical engineer doesn't do that, they don't even consider that a position of its own anyway.
Yeah, especially I agree with you 100% in the startup space. Until they get a few rounds down the road, they're not even paying attention to security at all.
And banks aren't enforcing that. So the banks they work with aren't saying you have to have an information security or security officer. Whether that's right or wrong, I'm not going to weigh in on. But the bottom line is they're allowing these companies, these fintechs, they are making them do their due diligence. They are allowing them to use these cloud services. They're allowing their engineering team to manage those cloud services. And they put a lot on compliance within those fintech organizations to make sure that those are done properly. So it almost becomes like a compliance issue when it really should be a technology issue.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent points. Before we move on to the next question, does anybody want to add into that?
So before anybody else, or I'll let anybody else add in, and then I'll come back around.
I think it's on you.
So You know, I had to Google real quick about the ratio that you asked. So I found a quick answer. I'm like,
agile.
agile.
I love it.
And a quick answer is 5 to 10% of employees. So
Oh, wow.
if you have 1,000 employees, you should have, according to this, security staff of 10.
Wow.
So that's what the numbers are. This very quick research, but I'll have to do some more digging to find out what they said. 5 to 10%. It's a whole other show topic. I agree. 5 to 10%.
Love it. So moving on to the next topic, Matt, this one's for you. So the global cost of data breaches is between 4 to 6 trillion, and that's trillion with a T. The average cost of a data breach in finance is 6 million. What patterns and strategies can we apply around data and applications to reduce the risk?
So I was thinking about this for a bit, but an interesting theme I've heard pop up in quite a few of our questions on this panel has been, what's the right balance between knowing something and trusting something, right? If you can fulfill all the SOC 2 controls, does that mean you're impenetrable, right? If a company downstream has, all those controls, are they impenetrable? So there's a real balance as we move to the cloud of like, what is it that we can actually know about this? And what is it that we're going to have to trust? And I feel like looking at the question with that lens kind of opens up some interesting items to kind of pay attention to. For me, I coming from like a developmental background, I trust very little. I want to know. I want to make sure it's there. And so it's, I think, really beneficial to understand exactly like what is this data? What is this data structure? What framework are we using? What's the service architecture? And then how are the teams composed, right? The more you know about those, the more close you can tailor a specific security strategy for, the right size fit. If you have a monolithic data store that has everything you need to know in there, but some certain rows are only for admin users or only for CEO, you're going to need to really get down and dirty and be like, okay, this has to be like a row-based access. We need some really refined granular controls. But on the flip side of things, say you have a data mesh data infrastructure, you really have to just establish a strong general governance and kind of expect those teams to uphold that on their end. Something like a data mesh is essentially like nodes of data lakes, really keeping each data domain separate and communicating across. And so you're no longer able to say, okay, we're going to have this pipeline tool, right? All the CI/CD looks the same. One data domain might have, a MongoDB instance that, needs a VPC link to communicate with services in the cloud. Another one might be, a graph database used for ML modeling. And so it's too much for any, centralized security officer to understand, okay, here's the right size tool for this deployment. Here's the right size tool for this deployment. And so I think it's interesting that you have to kind of tailor your strategy to, what's the right size fit? What are we trying to accomplish here? What do we need to know versus what do we need to trust? And getting that kind of picked out and known will set you on the right track towards what's your strategy need to be.
That's interesting. I want to dive into what you said about data mesh. I think historically we're used to monolithic data stores where everything is centralized. Now, the concept of data mesh that you mentioned with different nodes, decentralized data, do you think that's a more secure approach in the future than having things centralized? And if so, why?
I think it's a balancing act. I think if you have a rigid, centralized governance policy, you have to do this, and this across each team, you can see drift, right? You can see issues and holes appear in certain teams that might not have been part of that centralized team's decision making. So if you're able to delegate that out and say, hey, we expect this level of governance, we need, you know, this to be hit. These are standards more than actual controls. And then you delegate that out to the team to be like, hey, you need to come up with the best solution for this. We'll review it. I think you'll get a lot stronger security because it's built around this specific domain rather than just assuming everything looks the same. Let's just go through this checklist.
When I first heard it, I made an analogy like it's like a microservices for data. Is that a good analogy?
I think so. I think rather than having one centralized store, you have all these nodes. And like I said, domain-centric design is really important here, just like in microservice architecture. You really kind of have to say, what is this area doing? What is it responsible for? And how does this work? So yeah, I think comparing it to a microservice architecture, it's pretty analogous and a good description. And yeah, just being domain centric, I think helps everyone be heavier on the knowledge side and further away from the trust side, to the point that, hey, I know that team is the best in their field, so I have trust because of that. And so getting to that point, I think is really important to being kind of knowledge first to build the trust rather than just assuming that team has, you know, taken care of it and, you know, assuming the governance is going to fall into place.
As you guys know, I love my slides. So, I mean, in looking at like finance scores number 3 in terms of the most expensive data breaches in 2022. So the topic is right on point in terms of what we're talking about. I'd like to get some panel input. Does anyone want to add into what Matt's saying or questions around or thoughts around it? Okay, so yeah, so that, I mean, like I said, I've been fascinated with that concept of what you mentioned, and the whole idea of it kind of leads me into when we talk about trust, it's this whole concept of like zero trust and putting forth, you know, an architecture around that, and that's a whole other conversation and potential topic that I would like to discuss in the future and dive into, but find it very interesting. Know that we are close to our mark, and we can breeze through this quickly because I want to be respectful of everybody's time. But it's something that I saw, and they mentioned this is the top 8 fintech cybersecurity risk challenges, and this is just we can do a free for all right now, since we're coming to the end of the show. Identity theft is number 1. You know, in terms of what they're saying, obviously, a list of cyber attackers look for errors and vulnerabilities they can exploit and use to steal user information and identities. We've seen cases in which they may get compromised user identity in one domain, but they on one platform, but a lot of people don't change their password, so they start to use it in others. Thoughts around that?
It's a huge, huge, huge issue in the industry today. And it's not just one-off identity theft. It is like in the fintech space now, or in the banking space in general, what we're seeing is from the breaches from like Experian and Equifax and all those guys a couple of years ago, they let them sit, and basically the companies in the dark internet that are getting them, right? They let them sit and for a while, and then people kind of forget about it, and then all of a sudden they start popping up. And we're seeing the same people across, like we have, over 40 clients. We see the same people across multiple clients trying to do the same thing because they just do mass attacks, and a lot of them are bots. And it's just, identity theft is a huge, huge issue right now. It is a huge cause of fraud. It is a huge money loss for fintechs because they are eating these losses in a lot of cases. And it's just trying to keep up with it. It has been a full-time job for their teams as well as mine.
You know, I want to add into that. I mean, the identity theft as well, it's not necessarily all like from phishing, but sure, it's a huge vector. But, people who are former developers like me, how often did you check in your code and, you put the password, but now you're checking in your token, that you're using in the cloud, right? And whoops, now how many smaller fintech firms, et cetera, are using GitHub? So now it's actually public, right? And so you've accidentally checked your key in. Identity theft, right? No one had to trick you into doing it. You just did it, and now it's public in some cases, right? So very scary, but yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, obviously, like that's a great point, Dan. And you know, scanning your repos and GitHub for keys and different things like that prior to going live is or deploying to prod. To Dan's point, is super necessary. We just talked about data breaches. Let's get into DDoS attacks, distributed denial of a service attacks. It could potentially flood an app with traffic in an attempt to crash it and hopefully force a security breakdown in the process. Any thoughts on that? Okay, it's pretty self-explanatory. Let's move on to integration loopholes. Many popular fintech functions, such as mobile transfers, require apps to interact with traditional banks. Integrating the modern high-tech apps with the legacy systems often used by established financial institutions is difficult technical challenges. You can also obviously see different ways to exploit. Any thoughts on that before we move on to others?
And I think the good news is, I don't think this is a big issue, to be honest. I think
Okay.
of all of these, this is the least. Most fintechs are not integrating with the big banks and legacy. They're integrating with their processors. They're integrating with their KYC vendors. They're integrating with their card embossers. The banks are really, for fintech, unless, well, and this is where BaaS models are getting a lot of attention right now because they are kind of standing in for the bank, but on a true fintech model where the bank is really holding the FBO and just managing ACH volumes back and forth, there is very little integration between the fintech and the bank.
No, good point. Thanks for that insight, Joyce. Especially from your position of working these partnerships out. One, AI fuzzing. So until recently, AI fuzzing was slow manual process, which gave security teams a chance to find and fix. However, cybersecurity, cyber criminals are increasingly using AI and machine learning to automate the fuzzing process and uncover zero-day vulnerabilities, especially in APIs. Any thoughts on that? Well, one of the tips that they mention is to minimize the amount of data in server response to limit the data attack surface area. By using the least amount of data necessary, as well as random testing and data filtering, you can reduce the risk of sensitive information falling into the hands of cyber criminals. Next one, phishing attacks. Well, you know, we've seen this, and I think we just talked about it. You know, phishing attacks, spear phishing, targeting, then, you know, someone gets something in the email, they download. It's so funny. This one mentions that they come a long way since the quote unquote Nigerian prince. I don't take offense to that, by the way. But yeah, so I mean, modern phishing attacks feature hackers posing as banks, government agencies. I mean, I know of situations where, you know, I guess this is more of a business email compromise, but they'll send an invoice out, and you know, before having the necessary protocols, someone will actually just pay that invoice, and we're talking a lot of businesses have lost money in that with that method. Any thoughts on that?
I feel like my city just lost a substantial amount of money from that invoice strategy. Somewhere, I don't remember if it was Portland City or one of the smaller towns around, but they had a legitimate looking invoice from something, and they actually asked up the chain, "This looks not right. Do I pay it?" And they're like, "Yeah, just pay it. Just get it done with." And they lost at least $300K or something pretty big. It's real, and I think it's really important to, you know, we have our security officer training at Neocova. That needs to be on the whole company structure. You know, you don't want the CEO to exempt themselves from this training, but then, you know, they have more stake than many others when it comes to being, you know, target of a phishing attack. On the other
100%.
end, you don't want the CEO, you know, using an unknown number to text someone legitimately and say, "Oh, hey, I really need access to this data." That screams phishing attack. But, you know, I've seen, you know, C-level or board level members actually do this, and it's like, no, there's a reason we want to have a strategy and policy. You can't just do that. So that training is huge, is important for everyone on the company.
Nah, excellent point. And that leads into the next one, insider threats. And not all threats come from a disgruntled employee. I mean, you could just, to Matt's point, you might not be trained and you make a mistake. You open up an email, you give out a password, you leave something unlocked. That's another thing. Anyone wants to add in insider threats?
I just want to make a comment about all of these, and that's, it feels like it's the same risks over and over again. I mean, I used to put together decks like this for my then CISO, and outside of like, and this is 9 years ago, and outside of like AI fuzzing and maybe regulatory compliance, but I don't think so. It feels like it's the same tech challenges and risks, which is wild. But anyway, that's the point.
No, to your point, that definitely, yes. Last one, regulatory compliance. That's something. So regulatory compliance isn't a cybersecurity risk, but it's a challenge, in getting things, especially for small teams, and in getting things organized. Whether you're talking about SOC 2, PCI, DSS, different things like that. Getting all of those policies, procedures, making sure your systems are intact and organized is definitely a challenge in itself. Before we close out, does anyone want to add to that?
No, I mean, obviously that's my life. So yeah, I can tell you it's a huge challenge. And that's why companies like VGS, there's a couple of new ones, Springfield Labs is coming out now. There's a couple others that are out there that are standing in and doing this for these fintechs. Are becoming more popular because these fintechs and small companies don't have the ability to build this out internally themselves. Having said that, when you're working with someone like VGS, it doesn't take the compliance burden off. We still need to know who they are, and we still need to vet them, and we still need to get all their third-party oversight done, and we still need to monitor it. And then as you get bigger and you want to do SOC 2 and PCI, it's a huge undertaking. It's not cheap, and it's a long term, and a lot of these fintechs don't have the staff to do that. We tell our fintechs up front, it is not something you take on day one, because you can't do that and launch and be successful.
Okay. Thank you very much. Listen, I want to thank everyone. A couple of stuff I want to mention, and then we're just going to get into plugs, how people keep in touch with you, more about your company. So this is our 100th episode. We thank all of our panelists for joining today. Really great discussion. Something that I personally will replay and get some notes from. A few things on the Tech Behind FinTech. So please go to our website and go to Stay Connected and drop your emails. Here's some reasons why. We're going to be launching the 100 lessons learned from 100 episodes. So we will give that out to people that are in our network. Next, we are launching a podcast, so you'll be able to access us through your favorite streamer. Last, if you're a disruptive fintech looking for more exposure, we'll be launching our sponsorship and marketing packages. So definitely go to stay connected. Last but not least, I want to thank each one of my panelists. And let me just go down from those on. Please, Renee, how do people keep in contact with you, more about your company?
The fastest way to reach me is on LinkedIn. And my LinkedIn profile is Renee Brown Small. As Nnamdi shared, I'm a cybersecurity super recruiter helping awesome leaders hire great talent, and would love to connect with folks.
Next, Joyce, how do people stay in contact with you, more about your company?
Yeah, so iLEX is here to help the fintechs and the banks that are working with those fintechs in the space, helping them build out everything they need to launch their banks, their oversight programs. We work a lot with third-party oversight, info security, compliance operations, all the vendors that you need, KYC, all that good stuff. And we just help a program get all the way through to launch and post-launch and make sure they're doing it safely and soundly. So let us know if you need any help. And you can find me on LinkedIn under my name. iLEX has a LinkedIn page as well. Feel free to follow us. It's iLEX Group I think it's iLEX Group LLC. I don't even remember my LinkedIn page, but you'll find it out there under me. And if you have any questions, just yell.
Excellent. Kennedy, please let us know how people get in contact with you and more about Mitigant.
Yeah, so I'm mostly on LinkedIn, so easy to find my name, and also my company also has a LinkedIn page, Mitigant. That's also, I think, quite easy to find. So basically what we do is we offer a cloud security posture management system. We're really looking at companies that are using the public cloud, and we make it super easy to remain secure and resilient. It might be that you don't have security staff. You can already use our software, which is very intuitive, and you can already have a clear understanding of your cloud security posture. Even if you have staff, you could already reduce things like alert fatigue and so forth, and make it super easy for keeping your cloud infrastructure secure. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Matt, how do people keep in contact? Let us know more about Neocova.
Sure, yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn at Matt Almeida's Career. Probably easier just to follow a link from this this chat. Yeah, if you want to chat data security, distributed software, data mesh, I'm up for it. I'd love to chat with anyone in DMs. So hit me up. Alternatively, we have the Neocova page on LinkedIn as well. That's a great place to find out more about us. We're a company whose goal is to make banking data accessible and easy to make actionable. We're trying to empower small and medium-sized company banks and community banks in order to be competitive with their capabilities and services. So if you have any interest in finding out more about that, also feel free to hit me up or hit up our company page on LinkedIn.
Thank you very much. Also, Dan had to drop off to a prior a meeting. We got a little bit over. So Dan Faltyn, he was our first guest. You can find him on LinkedIn as well. Guys, thank you very much for joining. Really appreciate everyone. To our audience, thanks for tuning in. Those on Instagram, thank you very much. I see you. Those on somebody put their LinkedIn profile. This one of us. My LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, that's mine.
Oh, okay. That's yours, Kennedy?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for letting me know that. So yeah, so and then we're also, and I think we're gonna also have a LinkedIn winner. I think Nicholas Parks, he gave the a comment. He's gonna be one of the people that get our prizes. We'll be in touch with you. And I think that is it. Guys, have a great weekend and happy Friday to the audience. Thank you very much. And that concludes. And because I love our theme song so much, guess what we're going to close with? Our theme song. Guys, take care. Cheers.
Bye-bye.